Let's dive deep into The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. He is considered like the foundation of modern economics. It's a big one, but honestly, Smith makes it surprisingly engaging. Like, he really knew how to break down these complex ideas. One of those fascinating things he talks about is the division of labor and how it supercharges productivity. Like, he uses this example of a pin factory. Imagine just one person trying to make an entire pin from scratch, start to finish. It would be so slow and inefficient, right? But in Smith's pin factory, each worker specializes in one tiny task. One person draws the wire, another straightens it, another cuts it, and so on. By becoming experts in their little piece of the puzzle, they end up making way more pins than if each person tried to do everything themselves. And here's the thing, this isn't just about making more pins. Smith's point is that this specialization actually makes even the poorest person wealthier than, like, a king in a society without specialization. Think about that for a second. The simple act of dividing up tasks unleashes this huge wave of productivity and leads to more goods and services for everyone. And it's not just pins. This applies to, like, everything in our economy. So we've got all this productivity, but how do people actually trade these goods and services? Well, that's where money comes in. Smith takes us back to a time before money, when people used to barter, trading, a cow for some loaves of bread. But you can imagine how difficult that would be. Like, you'd have to find someone who both wanted a cow and had extra bread. And then you'd have to figure out, like, how many loaves one cow is worth. Not exactly the most efficient system. Then came precious metals like gold and silver, which were way better for trading. They were durable, you could divide them into smaller units, and they were valuable. So they became the go-to medium of exchange, making trade much smoother. And then coins came along, which standardized things even further. Each coin had a specific weight and purity, so you didn't have to weigh and test every piece of metal. It made trading even easier and faster. But Smith was a smart guy, and he knew there was more to the story than just coins and prices. He realized there's a difference between the nominal price of something and its real price. The nominal price is just the number on the price tag and how much money you pay. But the real price is what that money actually gets you in terms of goods and services. Think about it this way. Let's say you earn $100 today and you can buy 10 loaves of bread with it. But next year, because of inflation, those same 10 loaves of bread might cost you $120. Your nominal income is still $100, but your real income has gone down because your purchasing power has decreased. So even though the number on the price tag might be higher, what you can actually buy with your money is less. This distinction between nominal and real value is super important for understanding how inflation and deflation affect us. Smith's insight helps us see through the illusion of money and understand the true value of things, which is ultimately, how much labor goes into making them and what we can get in exchange for them. Right, so we've talked about specialization in money. Now let's get into how income is generated in an economy. Smith identified three main sources of income: wages, profit, and rent. Wages are what people earn from their labor. Profit is what businesses make from their investments. And rent is what landowners receive for the use of their land. These three things are constantly interacting, kind of like a giant economic game of rock, paper, scissors. They determine the natural price of goods and services in the market. And of course there are other forces at play too, like the famous invisible hand that Smith described. Think of it as a self-regulating mechanism in the market. Supply and demand are constantly battling it out, pushing prices up when demand is high and supply is low, and pulling them down when it's the other way around. Smith argued that this invisible hand, even though there's no one person controlling it, is what guides the market towards efficiency and balance. It's a pretty amazing concept, but even with this invisible hand doing its thing, Smith knew there could be some hiccups in the system. He was cautious about too much government interference in the market, particularly things like monopolies and trade restrictions. He saw them as obstacles to economic growth. It's like imagining a city where the roads are constantly blocked off or changing directions. It would be total chaos. And Smith believed that excessive regulation could create a similar mess in the economy, stifling innovation and ultimately hurting the people it was supposed to help. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Smith wasn't completely against government intervention. He recognized that government has an important role to play in providing things like defense, justice, and infrastructure. He just believed that government should focus on setting the stage for individual and business success, rather than trying to micromanage every single detail. So that was a quick overview of some of the core ideas we'll be exploring in this deep dive. And trust me, there's so much more to uncover, so buckle up, because next we'll be looking at some real-world examples and diving deeper into Smith insights that are still surprisingly relevant today. Stay tuned. Alright, welcome back to our deep dive into Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. In part 1, we kind of got a taste of some of Smith's biggest ideas like speculation, money, the invisible hand. Oh, and that delicate balance between government and markets. One of the things that really stood out to me while I was reading The Wealth of Nations was how incredibly detailed Smith was. He didn't just talk about these abstract economic theories like, he actually grounded his ideas in, real world observations and the historical examples. For example, when Smith talks about government regulation, he's all about these unintended consequences. He talks about how laws that are designed to protect domestic industries, like that whole buy local movement, those can actually backfire and end up hurting consumers by driving up prices and limiting choices. It's kind of like if you try to help a plant grow by keeping it in a tiny pot, eventually it needs more space to thrive. Right. And he was also, really critical of monopolies. He argued that monopolies stifle innovation and lead to all this inefficiency. Then he uses this example of the East India Company, which had this monopoly on trade with India back in the day. Smith argued that this monopoly resulted in, way higher prices for consumers and ended up, dragging down the entire nation's wealth, which is especially interesting now, looking as we're kind of dealing with the power of these giant corporations, this globalized economy. It's a good reminder that even though free markets could be these amazing engines for growth, we still need some guardrails to make sure there's fair competition and, to protect us, the consumers. And Smith's insights into how wealth is created are also, super fascinating. He goes against what was popular back then, this idea called mercantilism, which basically said that a nation's wealth was all about, hoarding gold and silver. Smith is basically nope, that's not it. It's about the productive capacity of your people. He emphasizes investing in education, infrastructure, roads, bridges, communication networks, basically all the things that help people being more productive. It's a message that's really relevant in our time, with all these challenges of automation and technological disruption and, this super competitive global landscape. Smith's steps are saying, invest in people, make it easier for them to do cool stuff, and the wealth will just, follow. Now, Smith wasn't just focused on, one specific point in time. He was interested in the entire evolution of how societies get wealthier. He describes these different stages of economic development, starting with, hunter-gatherer societies, then moving on to pastoral economies, where people herd animals, in agricultural societies, and finally landing on commercial and industrial economies. But what's cool is that he doesn't just, list them off, He actually dives into the unique characteristics and challenges of each stage, exploring the factors that help societies, level up, economically speaking. This historical perspective is really helpful because it shows us that economic development isn't this, smooth, predictable path. There are all these bumps and detours and, different societies move at their own pace. It's like comparing or taking a leisurely stroll on the park to running an obstacle course. You'll get to the finish line either way, but the journey is completely different. And speaking of different paths, Smith also looked closely at the economic policies of different nations. He compares and contrasts the policies of Spain and Portugal, who are all about hoarding gold, remember mercantilism, with the more freewheeling, trade-friendly policies of England and Holland. And guess who he thinks came out on top? The traders, of course. He also gets into the impact of colonialism, pointing out both the potential benefits, like access to new markets and resources, but also the downsides, like exploitation and inequality. Smith wasn't afraid to tackle those difficult subjects, so I know we've covered a lot of ground here. In The Wealth of Nations, a pretty dense book, we can't possibly get through everything in just one deep dive, but hopefully you're starting to see the depth and complexity of Smith's thinking. His ideas about how the economy works, what creates wealth, and the role of government. They're surprisingly relevant, even centuries later. But hold on tight, because in our final part, we're going to dive even deeper. We'll unpack some specific examples and explore those little nuances that make Smith's work so thought-provoking. Don't go anywhere. We've been through a lot, haven't we? From specialization to money, the invisible hand, and even a quick glance at how economies evolve over time. But we're not done yet. There's still so much to unpack in Smith's work, those little golden nuggets that make it so brilliant, even centuries later. One thing that always strikes me about Smith is his focus on competition. And I don't just mean winning or losing, he saw competition as the real driving force behind a healthy economy. He's not saying iron sharpens iron. Well, Smith believed that when businesses have to compete with each other, they're constantly trying to innovate, to improve their products and services, and offer the best prices. which, let's face it, is great for us as consumers. But without competition, things can get a bit stale, don't you think? Like, imagine a world where there's only one kind of phone, one car company, one internet provider. That wouldn't be very exciting, would it? And that's why Smith was so wary of monopolies. He saw them as these huge roadblocks to progress, leading to higher prices and less choice for everyone. And this is super relevant today, especially with those giant tech companies and global corporations that we see everywhere. It's a reminder that we need clear rules and someone keeping an eye on things to make sure everyone has a fair shot and that power isn't just concentrated in the hands of a few. Smith also had some pretty interesting thoughts about work and wages. He understood that wages, just like the price of, a loaf of bread or a new car, are influenced by supply and demand. Yeah, when there are way more jobs than people to fill them, wages tend to go up. But when there are tons of people looking for work and not enough jobs to go around, wages go down. It's like this constant balancing act, right? But Smith also realized that some jobs just naturally pay better than others, even when you take supply and demand into account. I mean, it makes sense. A brain surgeon is probably going to earn more than a cashier, right? Smith identified a few reasons for this, things like the skills and training needed for the job, the risks involved, and even how enjoyable or not the work is. He even observed that back in his day, coal miners, who had a really tough and dangerous job, often earned more than other workers simply because their skills were in such high demand. It's interesting to think about, right? The value of work isn't just about how hard it is, it's also about how much it's needed and how rare those skills are. And let's not forget one of Smith's most powerful arguments, his strong belief in free trade. Back then, the big economic idea was mercantilism, remember, where it was all about protecting your own country's industries and hoarding as much wealth as possible. And Smith is like, wait a minute, that's not going to get us anywhere, it'll just lead to stagnation and conflict. He really believed that free trade, allowing countries to focus on what they're good at and trade freely with each other, was the key to greater prosperity for everyone. He saw trade barriers like tariffs and quotas as self-inflicted wounds, hurting both the countries that imposed them and the ones on the receiving end. It's like trying to build a wall around your garden and expecting your plants to thrive. They need that sunlight and fresh air from outside. And even today, that debate about free trade is still going strong. There are good points on both sides.